Welcome back to Conversations for the Good. Good morning, Dr. Jane.
Good morning, Anna. How are you?
I'm doing good. It's great to see you and happy 2021.
Thank you. Likewise.
Yeah, we're finally here, right?
We're going to make it a great year, Anna.
I think so. Absolutely. And as we continue to find ways to cope, learn, and grow in this pandemic, we're always on the outlook for ways to improve ourselves for the better. I keep hearing and reading about emotional intelligence and wanted to bring it into our conversation today.
Well, Anna, it's a winner. It truly is. Daniel Goldman published his book, Emotional Intelligence, back in 1995, and it was on the New York Times bestseller list for a year and a half. So people really were ready for it. And since then, it has been really part of educational programs, everything from childhood character building educational programs to corporate leadership training programs. And the interesting thing is that there has always been and continues to be this body of research that follows it that really continues to or show it in the light of being very, very central to successful living, both personally and professionally.
So, how would you describe it?
Well, the short version is it's the capacity to be aware of our emotions and express one's emotions in a way that we're able to handle our interpersonal relationships, all those connections we have with others, both judiciously and also empathically. So this is something that we've been covering in our conversations, Anna. And Dr. Goldman really presented this in as a specific type of intelligence. And he really challenged us to think in terms of not only the intelligence IQ or quotient, which we call the IQ, but to actually think in terms of merging this emotional intelligence with intellectual intelligence. Because the intellectual intelligence is always measured by standardized tests. It relates to, intellectual abilities, mental skills. It's really how we learn and understand and apply the data and information around us. And clearly we're in an information age. But Goldman talked about really enhancing our reasoning by using an emotional intelligence, and in doing so, facilitating kind of what he kind of framed as a higher order of thinking. So he challenged us to move beyond our kind of worship of the IQ or the intellect, and really asserted that there was a way to actually be smarter by combining the two, the IQ and the emotional intelligence.
Dr. Jane, what does this all involve?
Well, Goldman talked about 5 different components, and they all, even though we're going to talk about them as kind of discrete, they all kind of blend into each other. It starts with self-awareness. We've been talking about this, knowing our emotions, knowing our triggers, our reactions to situations and people, knowing our strengths and our weaknesses. And then he also talked about self-regulation. We have the self-awareness, so it's about using that as a way to manage our emotions and how we express our emotions. So rather than allowing our impulses and our moods to determine the expression, we're really filtering, through this awareness and opting for another way to express. And he also talked about internal motivation. And this is really moving from kind of our perception of situations as being problems or roadblocks to really looking at situations and people as challenges in a really and positive challenges. So we're actually looking through lenses of curiosity and optimism. We're accessing things that we've talked about, our willingness and our gratitude and courage to, make healthy choices for really the better good. He also talked about empathy. Again, we've talked about compassion, and empathy is that piece that empowers us to both identify the emotions of others, but also to do it without any kind of judgment or criticism. So we're really willing to understand their outlook. We're really willing to kind of step into their position or into their shoes. And then lastly, he talked about social skills, and this is that present moment awareness that we operate out of when we're with someone, to set aside our own thoughts and really focus on the interaction, really look at what they're about. It requires active listening. So we're recognizing a person's experience, and we're able to communicate in ways that we can resolve situations, particularly conflict, without any aggression or without any threat. But it all starts with the first component, and that is self-awareness, that acknowledgement of my own feelings, my triggers, my reactivity.
Well, these sound all so familiar from our conversations.
Absolutely.
When we talked about managing our reactivity, thoughts, feelings, and impulses through present moment awareness, making conscious choices rather than allowing the autopilot thinking and our backstory to take control of our lives. Mm-hmm. So, can we talk about what happens when emotional intelligence is absent, especially in the crisis like the pandemic?
Well, these are going to be familiar, Anna, because we've all had days where a bad mood, disrupted us getting our work done, being on top of our game. And sometimes in those situations, we might have communicated, really with kind of a thoughtlessness or really in an unkind manner. And it could have been the result of a situation like poor sleep, an upset stomach, something, food, alcohol, could be anything. These tend to be situational, and we've also experienced, other people having a bad day and how that spills over and affects everyone they encounter. Sometimes it's about meanness or meltdowns or aggression, or sometimes they're just disengaged. And again, this can be situational. They're going through a particularly tough time. Certainly in the crisis, this has presented lots of opportunities for us to not be at our best. But the personal characteristics of a person who is lacking emotional IQ really involves things like not being able to take charge or make decisions, not open to constructive feedback or constructive criticism, an individual who holds judges, or they're easily offended or chronically feel like they're being misunderstood. We've all experienced most of these, but for most of us, they're not a pervasive personality trait.
Mm-hmm. Well, these are real roadblocks, which seem to be ever present in communicating and working as a team or in relationships.
Well, they're tough areas, Anna. And managing ourselves and staying emotionally connected can be challenging in the best of times. But managing in a crisis, like the current pandemic, can be extremely stressful. And we've discussed these dynamics in previous conversations, how this forced change in our lives, working remotely, sheltering, social distancing, the immense uncertainty, they feel, it all feels very strange and feels very unnatural. And to add to the crisis, there have also been these cycles of, and they've really been very constant, of infection rates going up, social discord, failing economy. All of these play into that fear, which triggers the survival mechanism, turns on all the fear networks, and reactivity is the result. So we're in high, intense emotional reactivity.
Well, this becomes very predictable. Everything is seen through a negative lens, it seems like.
Well, you're right. And negativity and negative emotions tend to be contagious. They're kind of like the virus. They flood us, they overwhelm us, and often they're supported by our beliefs and our fears and our backstory, conditioning from years gone by. So we operate in this survival mode, and we regress. We revert to very childish behavior sometimes. There's a vulnerability about it. There's an impulsiveness about it. We tend to be more defensive, sometimes more aggressive. And certainly, it leads to kind of this kind of general ineptness in being able to solve complex problems. because we're seeing the world as being dangerous and we're in this fight, flight, freeze mode, and the thinking brain is offline.
So I think I get it now. The components of emotional intelligence can bring us back in alignment with all dimensions.
That's absolutely right. That's absolutely right. You know, we all need to be seen and heard, feel like we're being understood and valued. And emotional intelligence fosters this, even in situations where normal life has come to a screeching halt. If we can opt to the emotional intelligence, you know, to the awareness, to the self-regulation, the internal motivation, the empathy, and the social skills, you know, there is this ability to be able to shift out of the imbalance that we find ourselves in. You know, and the real beauty is that emotional intelligence can be learned. You know, we can learn how to do it. Even if we already do it somewhat or do it well, we can always improve. And it works with the neuroplasticity of the brain, you know, that ability of the brain to make changes over time. So each time we discover our emotional intelligence and practice emotional intelligence skills, we really are establishing new neural connections. And we're linking that emotional brain, that limbic system, the more primitive part of the brain, to the thinking brain, the cerebral cortex. So this growth and these new connections ensure more of an ability to access this new behavior. And the more we practice, the more quickly it kicks into action when we need it. And eventually these new habits, you know, they create new circuitry and become kind of the default response. It's kind of like that's what comes up in a difficult situation. It just takes regular practice.
Dr. Jane, can we take a look more closely at the 5 components you mentioned?
Absolutely, Anna. You know, in emotional intelligence, the self-awareness is first, and this is really the foundation. So it's asking ourselves questions like, who am I? You know, what do I stand for? And to some extent, we want to not only bring in our beliefs, you know, and understand our backstory, but also kind of see the transparency that there are other options other than those conditioned responses. You know, it's also, what am I consuming as far as media, news, internet, contact that we have with anyone or anything that tends to feed my positionality. You know, sometimes we kind of get anchored in this needing to be right or thinking that we're right. You know, it's also about who am I listening to, and how do I listen? How do I support others? You know, what if what if they have differing opinions? This is where it starts to get a little dicey.
Yeah.
You know, and which part of me is in charge? Is it that little self that always wants to get up there and have my way, you know, or is it a better, higher part of myself? You know, what really matters to me? This is all part of that self-awareness. Also to look at how is the uncertainty of the crisis that we're in currently, how is it just kind of derailing me? Or am I able to take it in and use it for my growth? Okay. So this kind of leads us to knowing what our opinions are and what really matters most. So this lays the groundwork for the remaining components. It's that self-awareness that's so incredibly important. And then moving to self-regulation. Because, you know, as we mentioned in many of our conversations, you know, turning toward our reactivity is what allows us to see what's really going on. You know, to take into consideration through that observer self, you know, what's happening, and using my breath and the sensing of my body to become aware of the thoughts and the feelings as they're arising, and to really begin to understand through the vessel of awareness, which is the body, you know, what's fueling the drama. And by taking the observer self positioning, I'm actively not fueling the drama, but I can see where the drama is, and I can also see where it could go.
Well, these are such important components that can slow the reactivity way down.
Absolutely. You know, we come to know our triggers, and we can then own our reactivity and create ways to allow ourselves to know the truth, what's happening within us, yet respond rather than react. It's a huge difference. And one technique is naming the emotion as it arises. And so often when we do this, it loses its intensity. It's called name to tame. And this creates control of the emotional impulses. And we're better able to avoid those kind of impulsive, aggressive behaviors, that can easily be expressed in our actual behavior. So it allows us space to think before we act. We're giving ourselves that space so that we can choose to act from our heart rather than from our fear, rather than from our anger. So heightened emotions don't get in the way of big decisions. Those important pieces that maybe allow me to stay engaged, whether it's with people I love or people I work with. So it all starts with, really being able to be in what is happening without fueling any kind of drama.
Well, I personally love being around these type of people, because they have no hidden agenda.
You're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. And then we also have the internal motivation. And the internal motivation is when we're no longer only interested in external rewards like money or recognition. This is where we're moving to being motivated by kind of an internal call to do the next right thing. And so the challenges that we are up against are perceived as being positive. We perceive them as tasks to be accomplished, and we accomplish them. And the other piece that happens in this internal motivation is a sincere interest in the well-being of others. And that becomes kind of a centerpiece. And then there's empathy. And don't we love empathy, and doesn't that make us feel good? Because it adds to that open, accepting environment, that feeling of safety that we all long for, and true consideration of another's welfare. So it's where in empathy, the giving and receiving really start to blend. And there's also with empathy a real curiosity about others' perspectives, of others' beliefs. And with empathy, we're working hard to understand what's behind others' actions. So we're really looking to position ourselves outside of any criticism, outside of any judgment. And compassion plays in because we're feeling with the other, really allowing ourselves to be fully with them. And then lastly, the social awareness, which is kind of holding this unique and genuine caring and respect for others, which also, it adds to just a lovely environment, whether it's at home or in friendships or at work. And it's a commitment to healthy communication and acknowledging that others hold different perspectives. So it's really seeking to understand the differences, without any judgment or criticism. So we're never assuming that we know someone or what someone is about without taking the time and the interest to find out firsthand, to engage with them. We never rely on stereotypes.
What an amazing combination of qualities.
Isn't it? Isn't it? And some people are just kind of naturals at emotional intelligence. It comes from their early environment. Sometimes it's just kind of how they're wired, and some of us have to work at it. And it doesn't make one better than the other. Anyone can become proficient in emotional intelligence. The key is that you have to intentionally seek the skills, seek to improve the skills, practice the skills. The payoffs are profound, because it impacts every dimension of our lives. We're better able to regulate our stress and our reactivity. We boost our confidence and our communication skills. It also improves relationships, both personally and professionally. We're really encouraging collaborative efforts, teamwork, which very often increases job satisfaction. So the other thing is it's been found to be one of the most important predictors of career success, more so than intellectual intelligence, more so than the IQ. And human resource people and hiring managers very often use emotional intelligence assessments in their interviewing process. So it's become more and more a part of how people are assessed and chosen for different occupations.
Yeah, and it all starts with self-awareness, which we've been talking about in our conversations, and the present moment awareness, the sensing, recognizing the ABCs of thinking, and the backstory.
That's exactly right. So my own awareness opens the door to a new relationship, starting with myself, with others, with the world. You know, I'm able to release negativity. I can dissipate reactivity. I can allow the best and highest part of myself to drive the bus of life. And everyone I meet stands to benefit. So, you know, the bottom line on it is this becomes a gift. The emotional intelligence becomes a gift to myself and of myself that I give the world.
Well, Dr. Jane, I can't think of a better gift to share as we start off the new year. This is such important, life-changing information. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna.
Until our next conversation.